Welcome, welcome, welcome to another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Dr. Dave Peltz. Joining us as usual is our co-host, Dr. Joe Hamlett, and our special guest, Eric Crist. So today's wonderful topic is career transitioning, and we have a very unique perspective. Joe and I have talked about this before, but we have someone who's actually been in the phase of career transitioning for several months now. Military career, 20 plus years, 25 plus years military, master's degree, all around great individual and role model. So we're here to see what his thoughts are on career transitioning. So with that, Dr. Joe, here's the potato. What do you think of career transitioning?
Like Dave said, we've talked about career transitioning probably on a lot of our episodes, but like you said, we want to bring a different perspective in. But I'll just kind of do a quick highlight. So when we think about career transitioning, a lot of times people think about, well, I'm going to move to another department, organization, or I want to advance my career. And the reality is that you should be doing some form of career transitioning all the time. And again, I know we've said this in the past that it's not like you're always looking for that next thing, but I think it's more of a parachute or some way of protecting or saving you for those occasions that you're not, aware of, or that just drop in your lap that you weren't prepared for. So, perfect example. I had a colleague of mine a few years back. He was at a party, just kind of with some friends, and there was a young man that had just gotten out of the military. I just want to say he did his 4 year, 6 year enlistment, and then he got out. And so my colleague said, "Hey, so what are you going to do now?" And he said, I think they're hiring at the water department. I'm going to go apply and see what happens.
Right.
And so, so my first thought was this individual didn't do a good job of preparing for that next thing, that next career, that next opportunity. And so he was really just going to go with the hope that he could get a job. And then the other part of that is, what type of job is he going to get? Is he just going to be left with when he is he going to get something that he doesn't want to do, or that he doesn't really like or enjoy? So that's what I think of immediately is, if I'm going to not prepare myself, I'm going to have to accept what comes my way. So that's what I think of in terms of career transitioning, just being prepared for that next thing. And so I'll stop there, and I'll hand it off to Eric to see what his thoughts are.
Hey, Joe, Dave, thanks. Thanks for the invite to the show. Joe, you hit it right on the head. Being a career counselor on active duty for the Army, these are the types of things that I talk to soldiers and the families about every day, not just about the fact that what do we need to do to keep you in uniform, to keep you serving for our nation, but if we can't, how do we transition you back out? And that's the biggest thing that we find is we think we're prepared for it, and then all of a sudden that obstacle gets thrown in front of you, and it shortens your timeline. As we were talking before coming onto the podcast, there was an obstacle that's been thrown into my timeline that's now shortened my timeline up to about 6 to 9 months, where I was preparing to retire in about 12 months. But luckily enough, that preparation phase of listening to my mentors and saying, hey, start a little bit earlier. And how do we do that? And that's a big part that we do every day as a career counselor. And I'm looking forward to kind of diving into that topic a little bit more deeper throughout the conversations.
Yeah, and what y'all are saying really resonates with me. I remember when I was in one of my positions, I had a supervisor, this is on the civilian side of things, come to me and say, "Hey, Dave, we need a class for our employees on how to interview." And I'm like, "What's the problem?" And he said, "Well, they've been working with us for so long, we need to score them on their interviews. And they keep saying, 'Oh, so-and-so, you know me. Why do I need to answer that question?' Well, then that's a zero because you didn't answer the question." So you have to be more prepared than just, "Oh, it's the military. Oh, it's this." You can't make those assumptions. You have to put some time and preparation into it.
Okay.
Yeah. So, so that's we're off to a good start. Let's see if we can kind of pull some of these threads and make the sweater unravel, if you will. And so we talk about career transitioning, there's the military side of things, and then there's the civilian side of things, and there are some similarities, but there are also some significant differences. And I guess it's akin to if you're working in a position for X number of years, let's say it's 10 years, 6 years, and it's really intense, or even more, and it's an intense position. Sometimes we become accustomed to the way that environment works, and it's hard for us to recalibrate into a different position, whether it's from one industry to another, whether it's military to civilian, whether it's corporate to entrepreneurship, whether it's a big company to a small company, or vice versa. So there are a lot of commonalities and similarities that we go through. From personal side, you just have to understand it's going to take time. And when we do our military briefings, we back into those numbers to show it's not just something that can be done in 3 weeks. Well, it can, but there are some challenges that you really have to focus on. So the same holds true for the civilian side of things. You should be really prepared, or for the general public, you should be preparing for that what if. Your resume preparation, your interview preparation are kind of like an insurance policy. It's good to have it there and have them active and current, because you never know when you're going to need them. And when you are, then hopefully it's just dusting them off a little bit and then and jumping back into the ring. So.
Hey, Dave, you bring up a good point. When you brought up the fact that, we work at a career 10 years and it's intense. And typically what happens is we get so focused on doing whatever that day-to-day job is or task, and it is so intense that we really just focus on that. And so there leaves little time, or we don't even think about that, like you just said, that career transitioning piece, that if something happens, am I going to be in a position to move forward or move on to the next thing? And then I really think of too, and it happens in the military as well, but we think we get so caught up in the operational side of it that we don't think about, well, what if I want to go to the next level? What if instead of being an operator at this level, if I want to lead this team or grow, how can I do that if I haven't taken the time out to develop myself, earn certifications, get a degree or whatever it takes to get to that next level? And so I think that's where the challenge for most people is they get really accustomed to doing the same thing over and over again and not really thinking about the future. And I always, when I talk to people, like you say, if you've been there 10, 12 years, things are going great at that job, and then all of a sudden you get laid off, and there's 500 people in that region, in that same area, that are now going to be looking for the exact same job you are. What's going to separate you from that other person? And so if you have not done that, taking that time to do a little bit of, development for yourself, or thinking about what if, and I think you said that what if is a big factor. And I always, when you think about what if, people always think about, well, you're not really doing this job. You're always looking for the next thing. It's not that. And in my position, or in my situation over the years, it has been that way for me, that the shoe is dropped, and they've closed the doors. I've been laid off and things like that. So I've always kind of been in that mode. Right. But for those people that things have been going great for them, they've had their job for a lot of years, and they just get complacent or think, okay, I'm going to retire from this place, or I'm going to continue this. And so, that development piece, that preparation, all that stuff that you think about for career transitioning really doesn't apply to them. So, that's I think the challenge that most people have when things are going great. People don't tend to, do something that's going to help them, because they don't foresee it happening or occurring down the line, anything like that.
Yeah. And Joe, it reminds me kind of the analogy that, things are going great until they're not. It's like driving your car and not changing the oil. Everything's great until it's not. And then you're stuck somewhere and your car doesn't run. So you get a time setback. Eric, what are your thoughts?
Well, and I think that's kind of go off of what Joe was just talking about, and the fact of always being prepared, in the fact of today, we're finding that most industries are looking for industry certifications, right, versus having that master's degree, that bachelor's degree, or that doctorate degree. Whereas a decade ago, 2 decades ago, those were the primary targets.
Absolutely.
And this generation of service members, men and women that are separating, are coming out of 2 decades of fighting. But throughout that 2 decades of fighting, we were building up our college education, getting those bachelors, those masters, doctorates, and then to only find out, well, I'm 12 months from transition, that master's degree, as Dave highlighted in my in the intro, my master's degree, great, I have a master's degree, but you know what I want to do in industry, that master's degree really doesn't carry a lot of weight. That PMP certification, that ACP certification, those carry more weight into industry. And now you see transitioning service members that are chasing that at the last minute. You're seeing service members coming out and they got 10, 11, 12 different certifications that they've gotten over a 12-month period. But what does that do to industry? Industry looks at it and say, yeah, it's great that you have this piece of paper, but do you have the knowledge to back up that piece of paper? And I hear that as I do informational interviews and talk with people within industry, is it's the same thing, that individuals that are in the industry are doing the exact same thing. They're chasing that next piece. If I need to get more money, or I'm comfortable in this job, but I want to go to something different. So I've seen a lot of that similarity over the past 12 months is what we see on the military side of the house. It's happening in industry as well. And that's what I'm trying to get my organization to understand, being within the cyber community, that we have a hard time keeping our cyber talent. Well, guess what? Industry has trouble keeping their cyber talent as well, because everybody wants that talent. So they're going from one place to the next. How do you keep them prepared to move to that next place and be effective in that next job that they go into? So I see that constantly with the comparison between the two.
Yeah,
So
Eric,
Eric,
go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so when you have that conversation, say with a soldier thinking about their career choices, and just to your point, you know, like you said, years ago, it was the education piece that we were really focusing on. So how do you have that conversation now when you're talking to a soldier that's saying, hey, I want to get my bachelor's or master's degree? Are you actually, you know, kind of guiding them or suggesting or recommend maybe they think about certifications, just based on kind of what you just said? Are you having those conversations now with people?
Yes, we're having those conversations, but not just with the service members. We're also having the conversations with the proponents, because we have a document that we call a professional development model. And inside of that professional development model, it lays out what the proponent says, hey, here's your educational information that you need for your job. And some of the proponents do a really good job with now putting industry certifications into that professional development model, but a lot of them don't. So we're not just having those conversations with the service members and their families as they're working through their career path, but also having it at the top with the proponencies and saying, hey, for an example, I'll just use my career field. My career field focuses heavily on the SHRM CP within the HR community, because that's where retention falls within industry. But most of the career counselors that are separating from service are not going into HR jobs. We're going into recruiting. We're going into talent acquisitions. We're going into project management. But those types of certifications are not listed on our professional development model. So unless you actually do your own homework, you don't look for those. You're only looking to do SHRM CP because that's what the proponent is pushing. So to get to your point, Joe, yes, we talk with the soldiers, but we want to make sure that we're setting up the success for the future, that we're seeing that dynamic change between education to industry certifications. And let's start putting a little bit more emphasis on those industry certifications that will help you transition or move from one job to the next.
Okay. You know, Eric, you've brought up a lot of good points. I like the fact that you went back a little bit, emphasizing the importance of education 20 years ago versus where it is now. It's very certification heavy, but then there's that, but you also need to have experience. So if you're actually transitioning out of one industry line of work into another completely different or maybe slightly related, it can be a challenge because now you have the certifications, possibly even the college degrees to go with it, but no experience. So it's almost like it's a little bit of catch up. It seems like, it's either education, certifications, or experience, like like a triangle almost. And you have to find that sweet spot. And a lot of the folks that I talk to are realizing that they should have started sooner and to figure out some way to get them better aligned, even with the certifications and the education. What can I do to do a little bit more towards where I want to be? If I'm in one career and I want to go into another, are there things that I can do in my current job that I can at least get a little bit of a taste or a little bit of experience that I can put on my resume and say, hey, I'm not a project manager, but I have worked on, 5 projects and I've led 2, something like that, just to show and demonstrate that they're maneuvering and positioning themselves in the area that they want to go. And when you're 3 months out or 6 months out, sometimes even 12 months, you've run out of time to actually make those relationships happen so you can take advantage of the additional skill sets that you can get. And that's in the military and outside of industry as well. To Joe's point, there's right now there's still a lot of movement and fluidity in the job environments, and people are getting caught off guard thinking that they've got a good stable job, and next thing you know, they're being walked out, not because they did anything wrong, but because the companies changed their focus. And they're like, wow, I wish I would have known because I would have done this. And that shoulda, woulda, could have adage comes into play. And that's why we have the shows to help people stay conscious about their careers, about what they're doing, so that if that happens to them, they at least have a little bit of preparation under their belt. Hopefully that's the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead, Joe.
Go ahead, Eric. Go ahead.
I was going to say it was something you just said, something, Dave, that made me think of what we were talking about before we started recording, and the fact of when we look at going to the range, we have that 300-meter target. That's where you want to get to, but you've got to hit those different targets between 50 and 300 meters to get to that 300 meter. You don't just show up on a range and go straight to that 300-meter target. You've got to knock down these small things a little piece at a time, and you've got to have that vision of where you might want to go. Are there going to be adjustments? Yeah. Did I see myself, for an example, becoming a career counselor? I was looking to do that type of job coming out. So I set my degrees towards that. Now I've adjusted fire a little bit as to the industry that I want to go into once I go into retirement. My degrees don't perfectly line up with that industry. So now I have to make that adjustment and start going towards those industry certifications that are going to help me get into those fields and be able to document, okay, as you said, Dave, project management. I've done multiple projects over 20 plus years. Okay, now how do I take that and put that to where industry understands that I do have experience in it? It's just not the exact experience that you're looking for in a project manager.
Yeah, and that was kind of the path I was going to go down and kind of transition a little bit differently. But that's where I was thinking along the lines of, doing those things that gets us prepared to move into that new thing. But I guess the part, or, the question I was going to ask you, Eric, is, so since you realize in your situation, what has helped you, get prepared for that? How, and we've talked a little bit about preparation, but what's one of the next important things you think that can help people understand what you bring to the table? What is that next thing?
Well, I think it's understanding that terminology. How do we take our terminology and put it into a language that industry is going to understand? Obviously, if you're going into a federal job, into the GS or GG system, they're going to understand the
Right.
terminology. But if you're coming completely out back into the civilian and private sector, an acronym that we might use in the military means something totally different in industry, but it's the exact same acronym. So now being able to translate that into the experience, okay, this is what I do, this is what I've done, and this is how I bring value to your organization. Because the one thing I've always heard is you've served, you've worn the uniform for the nation, you're not going to have a hard time transitioning. Today, in most industries, you're really going to get a handshake, say thank you for your service. Okay, now what can you do for me? It's your service is not going to be that piece that's going to sell you into that organization. You now have to be able to translate exactly what it is you've done to where they understand it and they can understand the value that you're bringing to the organization. Yes, we're all bringing great leadership. We're all going to bring our leadership traits, our decision-making processes, but that's just a very small piece of the puzzle. When you step out of the uniform and step into industry in the civilian private sector, those are just a small piece of what they're looking for. They want that experience to say, okay, you've done X, whatever X may be. And you have to be able to translate that and to show that I've done it and this is how I've done it. It's just a little bit different than what you're used to seeing when somebody's transitioning from one organization to another within the civilian and private sector.
Yeah. And you hit the nail right on the head. And that was kind of where I was going, because even, my current position in a civilian, corporation, that's one of the common things I find when people come up to me and say, hey, how can I transition into this position here? I've been with the company 2 years. I did this on the outside. How do I articulate that in my interviews? And so that is a common theme these days. How do you articulate that experience that you bring to the table to now fit whatever that organization is asking for? So you're right. The military portion of it, transitioning into civilian, that is definitely a challenge. But it's still happening in the civilian sector as well. People are coming from different environments, work industries, and now they're trying to translate that experience into how it fits that current organization. So that is still a challenge, again, across the board, not just military. But that's one of the common questions I've been asked just in recent months. How do I translate my experience to what it is we do here? And so,
yeah. That's a very common question, Joe, and Eric, because it comes down to, as you mentioned, translating it. Every organization has their own culture, whether they call it an ecosystem or a corporation or whatever. You have to be able to translate what does a squadron equal to on the outside, or what does a platoon equal to on the outside, and what does an ecosystem equate to in one industry to another. And it comes down to translation of our hard skills, which are our technical skills, and our soft skills, which are our interpersonal skills, and even our job titles. Military has a very unique structure, and it's deliberate. And when you go to translate that into the civilian side of things, it doesn't work sometimes. I'm going to use myself as an example. When I got out, my career title was security forces. That doesn't translate. I got, oh, you're special forces. I'm like, no, I kind of wish I was, but no, that's not me. And they're like, what were you? And it really boils down to military police. And we need to call out those titles, what they are. Are you a department manager? Are you a director? Are you a deputy director? Are you, what is your function to make, what is the function of your title? So it's relatable. And that's one of the things that we get stuck on sometimes is, well, this is my job title in this industry, but that's different. So your experience doesn't necessarily apply because it's not in our industry. And that's not necessarily true, because if your technical skills, let's say they're cybersecurity skills, that cybersecurity translates. It doesn't matter the industry. It's just what specifically you'll do and what are the nuances. But cybersecurity. Same with any of our other jobs, just like you'd mentioned, Eric. You're basically doing recruiting and career counseling and coaching and that sort of thing, mentoring. Let's call it that, because sometimes these job titles just don't translate, and that's even civilian to civilian. And just because you haven't worked in that industry doesn't mean that you're not a very valuable asset to that company. We just have to help them understand what we do and how that translates to their environment. And that's where that homework piece comes in, where that preparation piece comes in.
Well, I think you're spot on there, Dave. When they talk about, I'll just use my own career field. When you say career counselor, what does career counselor mean in industry? It doesn't. It has no correlation.
Yeah.
The closest that you could probably say it gets to would be career coach. So, I talk with Matt Quick. He's one of my mentors. He was one of my mentors in uniform. He's still a mentor of mine now that he's retired. And that's something that he constantly pushes, is like, really our job is career coaching. That's what we do. But tell that to a career counselor that's wearing the uniform right now. We don't look at it as a coach. We look at it as we're counseling somebody. Well, counseling in the civilian and private sector means what? We're thinking therapists. We're thinking something along those lines is requiring some type of
I'm thinking
counselor.
bad Dave.
Exactly. There's something that it doesn't, that specific word, counselor, does not correlate the exact same way in the civilian and private sector. When you hear it in civilian and private sector, it's a totally separate meaning. So trying to get that out there and understanding that piece, that's probably been my hardest part during my transition. Luckily enough, I started my transition back in January of 2023. So 21. So January 21 is when I started my transition journey. I said, hey, I'm going to retire in January of 25. Gave myself a little bit of time to play with. But my very first informational interview that I did, it was a slap in the face. You're a career counselor. We really don't have that in industry because we're not trying to retain talent. If we need talent, we're just going to go buy it. We're going to let, as Joe mentioned, and Dave, you've mentioned as well about layoffs. Companies are doing that. You see these massive layoffs, 18,000 people. And then 6 months later, what's happening? They're hiring 18,000 people. It may not be the exact same jobs that they're hiring for because of the dynamic shift of the company. They're going in a different direction, but it's still, they're making that adjustment. And why are they doing it that way? Well, it may be cheaper to bring in talent than it is to continue paying what you're paying right now for that specific talent. And that was an eye-opener for me to hear that my job, after 20 plus years, I've been told I'm gonna be able to transition out, no problem, you're good to go, you're a sergeant major, you'll be able to find a job, no problem. And then somebody to tell me blatantly, your job means nothing to the civilian and private industry.
Yeah,
You need to find a career path.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest challenges, and that's even industry to industry, not even, and the military piece makes it even that much more frustrating sometimes, because now some companies tend to pigeonhole military people. And the thing that Joe and I like to bring up once in a while is that, when we all started, it was 2% of the population was military. Now it's down to 1%. So that's 99% of the population doesn't really understand what the military does and how those jobs translate. And that's a big challenge, because it's not like we have 98% of the people out there being a proponent. It's 99% typically don't have a good, solid, fundamental understanding of what we do and how it translates. We've got about.
Hey Dave,
go
I know we're getting on time, but
yeah.
I wanted to ask Eric another question in reference to career transitioning, and I know this is how we all met, and it goes back to, as you're again thinking about career transitioning, networking. How important is networking, Eric, in your opinion, to help with that career transition?
I would tell you, Joe, networking is probably the reason I'm where I am today. I still feel a little bit of stress. Yeah, my timeline's shortened up, but I don't feel the type of stress that I probably would have feel today if I didn't start building that network out. Having these conversations, as you mentioned, I've talked to both you and Dave through informational interviews to get a better understanding of what it's like doing your type of job. And continuing to have those conversations is not just, let me just have an informational interview with somebody and then you'll never talk to them again. To me, that's not networking. Networking is I've had conversations with you and I continue to have conversations with you. Absolutely. There was a post I saw this morning by Noel, and the fact of he had 10,000 slashed out followers and put relationships. That's the perfect way to look at it. Hey, followers don't really carry the weight of a relationship, and that's networking. You need to build that network, but you're also building a relationship at the same time, because at any given time you may need to lean on that network. As we've been talking throughout this whole discussion, something can happen. You could be in industry, you could be in the military, whatever it may be. There's a change. Now you can reach back. You can reach back to that network and have conversations with people within your network and say, hey, I'm trying to get here. They may not know, they may not have the answer for you, but they might know somebody in their network
Absolutely.
that can get you to where you want to go.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's, again, that's the message I try to relay to people when they, when I meet people. That's the first thing I say too. It's about building those relationships, and it's not to use people or to, gloat and say, hey, I've got this many followers or connections. No, it's about building those true relationships. And that's what it's about. Like you said, you and Dave have talked more than once. And again, now you're on our podcast because that's what it's about. It's about building those real relationships, not just, again, a number count, but those conversations that can help you help each other. That's what it's about. And so that's I just wanted you to kind of finish off this whole career transitioning piece and helping people understand how important networking is. A lot of people get I was a mechanic for a lot of years, and so the only people I associated with was mechanics. It was that I'm in this silo. This is the greatest thing since sliced bread. But then as I started to open my aperture and started to really open my eyes to what was going on around me, I realized the benefits of growing those relationships with other organizations, other people, and I started to see the bigger picture, and that made a lot more sense. Now I value these relationships that I start to build. So,
Awesome. That was great points. I'm glad you brought that up at the last minute, Joe, because that's a big nugget and a big takeaway. We've got just over a minute left, so I'm going to ask Joe, what final thoughts do you have? And then Eric, we'll go to you next, and then we'll close out the show. So, Dr. Joe, any final thoughts?
Again, I think we, like me and David said, we've already touched on career transitioning before, but I think bringing Eric in with his perspective, someone who's just going through it today, and the things he's learned in these past couple of years, as he's been doing his transition, I think is really relevant, not just in the military, but across the board, since a lot of these things now seem to overlap. A lot of the same criteria is being asked of people, like Eric said, just the acronym thing. That's that translation piece, helping people understand what you bring to the table. So just career transitioning, it's not about, I'm always looking for that next thing. It's just really about that preparation and being in a position that if something happens, that you're ready to move forward, that you're ready to go. And it won't take much of a transition to help you get there. So I'll just end it with that.
Thank you, Dr. Joe. Eric, Mr. Eric, what else you got for us? Any final thoughts?
Yeah, again, Dave, Joe, thank you for the invite to come on the podcast and have this discussion about transition. But the one thing I would like to leave with your audience is the fact that transition never stops. It continues. You may be successful today, but tomorrow something else gets into your way. Constantly keep building on that transition process. If it's building that network, if it's building that education, if it's building out a whole new career field, just be prepared to take those obstacles that are placed in front of you and just work through those obstacles. Don't let those obstacles be the reason that it comes to a dead halt and then you're stuck and you're just spinning for months on end. But at the end of the day, you have to continue to move forward, because if you don't move forward, you're just going to get into Groundhog's Day, and that's what it's going to be like for the rest of your life. And that can probably be very miserable.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Eric Crist. We really enjoyed you joining us for our show. Dr. Joe, privilege as always. With that, we'd like to say thank you to our viewers and listeners for joining us for another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. If you liked or enjoyed what you heard this time, or on any of our other plethora of episodes of awesome content, give us a like, give us a share. That's what we're here for. We're here to help people. This is our passion. This is what we love to do, share this knowledge so that everybody out there doesn't have to take the long scenic route that Joe and I like to refer to. With that, thank you again, and keep on being your not so ordinary you.